Hey everybody. Today I'm going to be talking about the WiiM Ultra. Now this is probably something that you've seen reviewed by many other people at this point. Frankly, I'm late to the party. And the reason for that is because I've just been enjoying my time with it. If you've seen this channel, then you already know. But if you are not aware of what I do, I don't deep dive into subjective terms. I don't pull out my thesaurus and slip on my glasses and go, yea, verily, this sound is robotic with a hint of mincemeat on top of gelatin pudding, and it sounds like chocolatey mid-bass. I don't do that, okay? I try to keep everything as plain Jane as I can when I give my reviews and talking about sound. And I also try to back that up with objective information. The objective on this is going to be somewhat thin. I've got to make up for it somewhere. Am I going to make up for it in subjective terms? Hell no. I'm not going to do that. But what I am going to do is I'm going to provide you with some basic information of this thing, my time with this in the past month or so, how I've used it, what I've enjoyed, some of the cons, and then hopefully provide you with information that you find actually helpful in determining if this is the right product for you. Let's talk about specs while I show you some video of this. This features a 30-bit 384 kilohertz decoding ES9038 Q2M Saber DAC. Ooh. There is a 3.5-inch full-color touchscreen on the front. It does feature built-in room correction, which is done via the app. You can control Qobuz, Amazon Music, Tidal, Deezer, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and more. It also supports Google Cast. There's Bluetooth capability and also works as a room player, but requires subscription and RoomCore running on your network. There's a turn front panel knob to control volume, press to start or pause playback on the front. Rear panel mic for ensuring multi-room synchronization, as well as a front panel headphone jack with separate headphone amplifier built in. As far as connections go, you have RCA output, coaxial and digital optical outputs, line level analog stereo input, analog stereo RCA phono input for turntable with moving magnet or moving coil cartridge. HDMI ARC supports 2-channel PCM, but only up to 24-bit 192 kilohertz. Optical digital input, USB Type-A input for connecting an external USB drive, and mono RCA output for connecting a powered subwoofer, all at a cost of about $329. I'm not a hardcore SQ enthusiast when it comes to desktop audio, and I know that some people are. They care about all the bit rates, every last bit rate. Got to grab all the bit rates, pull them in. That's not me. I'm not really hardcore into that. The way that I used this guy was mainly two ways. Number one was in my living room setup. I had it hooked up to a pair of March Audio P501 mono blocks for left and right amplifiers separately, powering all sorts of speakers. I've had the SVS Ultra Evolutions on these. I've had the MoFi 888s on these. I've had, the Infinity Primus 360s that I've talked about, the KEF Reference Model 203 that I've recently talked about, JBL 280F and JBL 250B, along with probably other speakers that I can't even remember right now. In addition to that, I also use this audio output to provide signal to two types of powered speakers. One is the Bucart A10, and then the other is the KEF LSX 2LT. That's a tongue twister. The latter does not have analog input, so it accepts only HDMI, USB, or optical input. So how I set this up was I used my computer, streaming Apple Music, analog output of my computer into the WiiM Ultra, and then optical output from the WiiM Ultra to the KEF speakers. Sounded just fine to me, did the task perfectly. Additionally, when using this with the Bucart A10s, I set the RCA output to the Bucarts. Now, the Bucart takes an XLR balanced input, so I had to use an RCA to XLR adapter cable. That is one con about this WiiM, is that I wish that it had balanced outputs and inputs, but at $329 for the whole unit, I can't really fault it for not having that. My main use, however, was out of my television into the WiiM and into a pair of powered monoblock March Audio P501 amplifiers and then two separate speakers. I'm a simple guy. I like things to work simply. So I hooked up the HDMI out of the ARC channel from my television and into the HDMI input of the WiiM Ultra. Used my Apple TV to control volume and whatever sources I wanted to use through my actual Apple TV box, and I was good, set, ready to go. No issues there. Another con, and this is a big one for some people, but not for me, is this does not have Apple AirPlay. Now, I know that a lot of you are already aware of this. Personally speaking, I don't care about that. Everything that I run through this uses Apple something or another already. So, Apple TV, if I'm listening to music, I'm listening through Apple Music, through my Apple TV, HDMI output into the WiiM. I'm good to go. I don't have to worry about streaming directly from my phone via AirPlay. But if that matters to you, then this is probably going to need to be checked off of your list because it simply just won't do it. And as far as I understand, it never will. And while this does have a USB port on the back, you cannot feed your computer's audio USB output directly into this. It just won't work that way. So if you're looking for something where you can feed audio output into a box, this isn't going to be it for you either. And finally on my list of cons, and I know it seems like there's a lot, but hey, I've got to be thorough as best I can. The volume knob. When I first got this thing, what I noticed was that the volume knob seemed kind of scratchy, and at some point, it would kind of get a little bit rough to adjust, and I would have to keep powering through it. Now, I'm not saying like I got to go work out power through it, but I'm just saying you would notice that was rough. You'd have to keep going. You'd go through it, and it would kind of like click or something. Well, at some point, it quit doing that. Now, I don't know why exactly. My guess is that this button right here also acts as a play and pause button. So you can push in on it. My guess is simply pushing that button a few times remedied that scratchiness and it got rid of it. I haven't had that issue since then. Okay, so now let's talk about the pros because there's a lot more pros. Frankly, this thing is stupid simple to use. You have 10 bands of graphic EQ or 10 bands of parametric EQ, but the cool part is that you can use these as individual left-right filters. So you can have 10 bands for the left speaker and 10 bands for the right speaker of either EQ. And this is really important if you have an asymmetric layout. And most homes probably do. If you have a symmetric layout where everything is perfectly symmetric from side to side, your left side of the wall looks exactly as the same as your right side of the wall, and you're sitting dead center, and you don't have a flower pot over here, you don't have a couch over here, everything is just the exact same. Split the room down the middle, perfectly symmetrical. You probably don't need individual left-right equalization. But if your room is like a standard room where maybe you have a chair on the right side, but not on the left side, or you've got a wall on the left side, but maybe not on the right side, that individual left-right EQ is going to come in. It's going to be a lifesaver for you, frankly. If you have something like REW, Room EQ Wizard, and you can measure the in-room response, what you can do is you can use the equalization for each left and then each right, and you can basically make those sound similar. Why do you want to do that? Okay. Tonality for sure, right? Like you can change the tonality and get the tonality to sound the way that you want it to sound. If you want a little bit more deeper voice, maybe you bump up 100 to 160 hertz for the male vocal region, something like that. Maybe you could bump up 100 to 300 hertz and get vocals for male and female a little bit more deeper. Maybe you want a little bit more punch. Maybe you bump up 50 hertz to 60 hertz. If you want a little bit more sparkle on the top end, bump up 8 to 10K, something like that. Okay, so these are little tonality adjustments that you can do, and you can find all sorts of recommendations on the internet to get a sound the way that you want it to sound. But if you're starting off from a deficit where the left sound doesn't equal the right sound in your seated position, it doesn't matter what you do between those two speakers, you're not going to have good imaging. Your focus is going to be out the window. So images within the soundstage may blur to one side or the other. Your focus is going to suffer because of that. Your precision of the instruments within the soundstage, if you're into that sort of thing, which I am, they're going to blur a little bit. So if something is supposed to be left of center, well, now it's like left of center, but it's a blob somewhere and it's closer to left than it is left of center. Your center image is going to just be morphing and doing weird things. Now, of course, all this depends on the music that you're listening to. But if we're talking apples to apples comparisons where you have a disc or a song or something of that nature and you're listening and you know that it's supposed to image pretty tightly and it doesn't, that's probably because your room is asymmetrical and the reflections in the room as well as your direct sound are going to arrive differently and they're going to sound different in the main seated position. So now you can take a microphone, you can measure your in-seat response, get a good, it doesn't have to be perfect, but you get a good idea of the left-right balance. And then you go, oh, okay, well, at 2 kilohertz on the left speaker, it's a little bit brighter. So I'm going to bring that one down a little bit to match the right side. Or maybe, for example, 400 hertz to 500 hertz on the right side is a little bit bumped up. Maybe you want to bring that down. Or you've got room modes that you need to fix. Now, this does have built-in room EQ software. I tried it. I wasn't a fan. I stick with my own homebrew. So I'll measure in the room. and I'll say, all right, well, there's a peak around maybe 71 hertz. I'm gonna bring that down. It's really narrow. I'm gonna bring that down. Or there's a peak around 160 hertz. I'm gonna bring that down. So you can do that with both speakers, but you can also do it separately. And when you do that separately, you get things more cohesive. Just frankly, it's more cohesive. Everything sounds tighter, more focused, and the tonality, believe it or not, actually improves by doing that. The subwoofer output is, how do I say this? It's not fixed frequency, but the low pass filter and the high pass filter. The low pass filter would be for your sub. So it's going to cut off the subwoofer from playing too high frequency. The high pass filter is going to be for your mains so they don't play too low. When you activate the subwoofer option through the app for the WiiM Ultra, what happens is the subwoofer filter is turned on, and let's say by default it's turned on at 80. So you're going to have crossover like this. And as you move that crossover frequency, you can move it to a higher frequency like 250 hertz, or you can move it down to 30 hertz. In doing so, those slopes are locked at about 24 decibel per octave slope. Now, the con to this is there may be cases where maybe your room, your particular setup, your speakers would benefit from having asymmetric slopes. Maybe instead of both 24 decibel per octave slopes, maybe one's a little bit steeper. Maybe that the main speakers is 48 decibels per octave. Or maybe you want a more shallow slope for your subwoofer because it tends to blend better, provide you a little bit more overlap. If you had the ability to do that, that's more fine-tuned control from the user that could result in better sound, but doesn't necessarily mean it's going to. That would be one improvement that I would like to see personally, maybe in a future update if possible. The other thing I like about this is the display on the front has different options. So it doesn't have to just be the spectrum analyzer that you see here. You can also set it to a VU meter, but then you can also set it to album artwork. Now, in my reviews, you know I try to always be objective. With a product like this, it's kind of hard to provide objective data with the hardware that I have. If I had $30,000, then I could buy something like an audio precision analyzer and use that and test this thing until my heart is completely content. But I don't have that. Instead, what I have is a Quantazlum 402. And it's pretty limited in regards to what I can test for this. Now, for testing amplifiers and things like that, it does everything I need to do. But when I'm trying to test digital components and things of that nature with HDMI inputs and optical input and output, I'm kind of limited. But I will be providing you with some objective information just to kind of shore up the basic necessities or the basic specs of this particular item. I'm going to hit you with a couple quick tech things that I was able to grab at least from my Quant Analyzer, Quantazlum 402. First off is the line in out frequency response, just to show you, hey, yeah, there's nothing weird about this thing. It's making good frequency response. It's flat as a board, at least with the sampling rate that I was using, which was 48 kilohertz 16-bit. Next up is the output level versus the THDs. I get to about 5.25 dBV before clipping really sets in, and that's roughly 1.83 volts RMS. And you may be thinking, well, it says it can do 2 volts. Well, it can. Testing stuff like this with the tools that I have on hand, I have tools that are close enough, but not perfect. So the other option that I use is this, and this shows me at 2 volts, I have 0.01% THD. So it's really quite low. In other words, their spec at 2.1 volt RMS, I trust that. I think that's okay. As far as noise goes, this is what I got. Basically in red is the noise of the measurement gear that I use. And then in yellow is the noise of the WiiM Ultra. And you can see that they pretty much stack right on top of each other. You see this spike around 60 hertz. There's one around 120, another one around 180. That's just due to the line noise from my home. It's a new home, but it's not perfectly quiet. If I had a line conditioner, I could probably battle out this noise or maybe figure out some way to bring this down. I don't have that. And I think for the purpose of what I'm doing here, which are basically just sanity checks, like, is the noise audible? Well, at about 130 decibels or 120 decibels down, no, it's not. And if you say it is, oh my God, you have like bat ears. But the other thing is I want to test, is the power right? Is the voltage output correct? You know, those things. And the voltage output of about 2 volts RMS is correct per the spec. And it's enough to drive pretty much any amplifier out there, unless it's a really weak amplifier. Most amplifiers will make rated power by 1 volt RMS or at the least 2 volt RMS. So with the standard amplifier that you probably have at home, you should be more than fine. And that does it for this review. Now, I'm going to mark this review as a promotion because I imagine that WiiM is just going to say, keep this. They probably don't want me to bother with sending it back. They did the same thing with the WiiM amplifier that they sent me for review. So I went back and marked that as promotion. That's part of it. That's part of the friggin' law, you guys. If somebody sends you something to review and you're told to keep it, you've got to mark it as promotion. So I'm marking it as a promotion. If you are interested in buying this unit, please consider using any of my generic affiliate links. I don't have one directly to this item, but if you go to my generic affiliate links and click on Amazon or Crutchfield or anybody else who sells this, and you buy it through that link, then it will earn me a small commission at no additional cost to you. I don't use an exact link because maybe that's a little bit too close to trying to persuade you to buy something. So I'm going to not do that with this particular thing, but it's $330. It did everything that I wanted to do. No noise. Worked perfectly fine to drive the amplifiers. Signal output on the optical output worked perfectly fine to drive my KEF LSX LT2 or two LTs, and they're not mine. They're still KEFs. I haven't sent them back yet. And then the Bacart A10s. No problems using this thing. No issues with the volume knob once I pushed that darn thing in a few times. And then to recap the cons, there's no AirPlay support if that matters to you. Not an issue for me, but I'm sure it might matter to some of you out there. You can't hook a laptop directly into it and feed its USB signal into this particular WiiM Ultra and listen to your music library that way. And that's it. I mean, the XLR input thing or output thing, who cares? Because it's $329. So not a big deal. And that's it. So yeah, if you enjoy what I'm doing here and you'd like to support me, you can do so one of two ways. As I said, you can use a generic affiliate link, or you can join me at patreon.com/Erin's Audio Corner. And there you can get behind the scenes info, some sneak peeks and polls and things like that. And just, I don't know, it's a fun community to be a part of. At least I think so, but I'm probably biased. So with all that said, I hope you have a good one. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, as always, leave them in the comment section. And if I don't like it, then I'll just want to ignore you. At least I'm being honest. All right. Talk to you later. Take care. Peace.